Hello everyone, let's discuss experimental designs today. Now, what are experimental designs? What type of experimental designs are there that are part of our syllabus? Now, to begin with, as we speak about experimental designs, to put it in a simple manner, an experimental design is a mechanism. It's a mechanism that an experimenter uses to allocate participants to different experimental conditions, right? Let me repeat. An experimental design is a strategy, or you could call it a mechanism, that an experimenter uses to allocate participants to different experimental conditions. There are three types of experimental designs that are part of a syllabus. To name them, we have repeated measures design, independent measures design, and matched pair design. To begin with, what is a repeated measures design? Now, as we speak about repeated measures designs, or as the name suggests, an experimental design where the same participants are repeated. When same participants are made to go through different experimental conditions, we refer to that as a repeated measures design. If I may say, repeated measures design when there are same participants made to go through different experimental conditions. Same participants made to go through different experimental conditions, we refer to that as a repeated measures design. The participants are being repeated. Let's read this here. This type of designs means that the same participants would participate in different experimental conditions. Essentially, the same participants are being repeated in different levels of IV. Now, I'll give you an example over here real quick. Now, if you're talking about research being conducted between being conducted about the relationship between the amount of light in a classroom, amount of light, amount of light in a classroom, and the concentration level of students, the concentration level of students. Let's just say there are three different there are three different IVs over here. This is the IV, this is the DV, the independent variable and the dependent variable. So the first independent variable is a class being conducted with a single light switched on. The second variable is a class being conducted with two lights switched on. And the third variable is a light being conducted with three lights being switched on. Let's just say we have 10 students in a class. Now, if you're repeating the same 10 students, let's say on a Monday, you make these 10 students take a class with a single light switched on. On Tuesday, you make these students take a class with two lights switched on. On Wednesday, you make these students take a class with three lights switched on. Now, like I had said, an experimental design is a mechanism or a strategy that is used by the experimenter to allocate participants to different experimental conditions. So the first one is a repeated measures design. I tried giving you an example of a repeated measures design. Now, there are certain strengths and limitations of a repeated measures design. You might as well pause this video here and read through this. Those were the strengths, and then we move on towards the weaknesses. Taking it ahead, if we speak about the second experimental design that's a part of a syllabus, that is an independent measures design. An independent measures design is when you make different participants go through different experimental conditions. You're making different participants go through different experimental conditions. Different experimental conditions, you refer to that as an independent measures design. Let's read this here. In an independence measures design, different participants are assigned to each experimental condition or levels of the independent variable. Consequently, the data for each IV level is considered independent since it originates from different individuals and is not interconnected with any other data. Now, again, the relationship between the amount of light in a classroom and the concentration level of students. But now let's just say, if we say there are 30 students that we have, right? We have 30 students, and for I'm giving this example to help you understand what an independent measures design is. So these 30 students, let's put them into three different groups of 10 students each. So we have three groups here, and each group comprises of 10 different students. Let's name this the first group as group A, the second one as group B, and the third one as group C. Now, for these three groups, if we make the first 10 students in group A go through the first level of IV. Or in other words, if we make them take a class with a single light switched on, we make the second group, that is group B, those 10 students take a class with two lights switched on. And we make the third group of students, that is group 3, take a class with three lights switched on. This is when we are making different participants go through different experimental conditions. This is referred to as an independent measures design. Now, this independent measures design has its own strengths and limitations too. You might as well read through this so that you understand it better. Now, moving on towards the third experimental design, that is a part of a syllabus that is referred to as matched pair design. Now, for matched pair design, I would want you to consider this as a I would want you to consider this as a fancier version of independent measures design. Let me give an example. When we speak about independent measures design, a problem that we come across over here is that in an independent measures design, there are different participants who are going through different experimental conditions. In that case, don't you think there would be differences amongst these participants that might be playing a role in terms of bringing in a difference in the DV or the results of the experiment? Now, for instance, this first group has, let's just say, if we talk about distinctions among these participants on the basis of gender, this first group, let's just say, has 6 females and 4 males. And the third group has 9 males and 1 female. Now, don't you think gender over here could possibly be a reason that could bring in a difference in terms of the results, right? So, to be able to avoid that, what we do is, what many researchers do is, they try to match participants. Or they try to match different characteristics of the participants. Of course, 100% matching 100% accurately is not possible. Even if we speak about twins, that is identical twins or monozygotic twins, even they have differences, right? So a match pair design is when there are, let me just write it, a match pair design is when there are different participants going through different experimental conditions. However, the participants that you have over here, you try to match these participants in terms of different characteristics, right? You're trying to match these participants, and hence the name a matched pair design. So a matched pair design is an experimental design where experimenters carefully pair participants based on certain characteristics or traits that are relevant to the study. These pairs of participants are matched in such a way that they are very similar to each other in terms of these characteristics. Now, we do this to avoid participant variables, right? Participant variables are the differences amongst participants, which might consequently lead to differences in terms of results. There are certain strengths and weaknesses of match pair design that you might as well would want to read. Now, taking this ahead, I'd suggest you pause this video here and read through these different strengths and weaknesses of the 3 different experimental designs. Let's quickly move on and let me walk you through a question that would help you identify these different experimental designs. Now, again, this is an example of a novel research situation question. Giving this a read. Ed and Jim are planning a field experiment about learning. Ed and Jim are planning a field experiment about learning. They want to know whether young children learn to use mobile, that is cell phones, from older brothers and sisters. They each offer their phone to a younger brother or sister and also to a cousin who has no older brother or sisters. They time how long it takes each child to find a game to play with on the phone. Now, there's a question that we have over here, but I'd like to skip this. I'd move on, and I'd like to move to the question that is on experimental designs. So this is what I'm talking about. So if I have a look at this question, the question over here reads, explain the experimental design being used in this experiment. Now, let's try to revise the 3 different experimental designs we had. Number 1, repeated measures design. That is when the same participants are repeated over and over again. They're made to go through different levels of IV. Or in other words, repeated measures design is when the same participants are made to go through different experimental conditions. Independent measures design is when different participants are made to go through different experimental conditions. Matched pair design is when different participants are made to go through different experimental conditions. However, the characteristics or the traits of these participants from different levels of IVs, they match to the best of the researcher's capability, and of course keeping practicality in mind. So explain the experimental design being used in this experiment. How this happens to be a 2-mark question. How do you get marks over here? You get the first mark for identification of design, and you get the second mark for link justification. Now, if you have a look at this, this is an example of an independent measures design. Why an independent measures design? Because the participants are not being repeated, because we're talking about two different sets of participants over here. See, Ed and Jim are planning a field experiment about learning. They want to know whether young children learn to use mobile phones from older brothers or sisters. They each offer their phone to a younger brother or sister, and also to a cousin who has no older brother or sister. So Ed and Jim, what they do is they offer their phone to a younger sibling and to another cousin who has no older brother or sister. They time how long it takes each child to find a game to play with on the phone. That's irrelevant for this particular 9B question. So the answer to this question would be an independent measures design, because the child either did or did not have an older sibling. So we're talking about different groups over here, right? So the first group is a group that did have an older sibling. The second group is a group that did not have an older sibling. So this would be an example of an independent measures design. Quickly moving on to another question. The second question over here reads, Albert is investigating autism. He plans to obtain a sample of people with autism and a control group. He will compare how well these participants judge the feelings of dolls which are either dancing, crying, waving, or smiling. So where's a question on experimental designs? Yeah. Oh, so we have a question on experimental design. This is a question on experimental design. Yeah. Now, Albert is investigating autism. He plans to obtain a sample of participants with autism and a control group. So there's a group that is autistic, and there's just another group that's a control group. He will compare how well these participants judge the feelings of dolls which are either dancing, crying, waving, or smiling. We're talking about two distinctively different groups over here, a group that is autistic and a control group. Moving on to the relevant question related to experimental designs. The question over here reads, describe the experimental design used in this experiment. Of course, the experimental design used over here is an independent measures design, because we're talking about two distinctively different groups. There's this one group, like I said, that is autistic, and then there's this another group that is not autistic, that is the control group. Moving on to another question real quick. The question over here reads, Bella is conducting a laboratory experiment. Bella is conducting a laboratory experiment to find out about people's fear of animals. She asks each participant if they have any phobias. If the participant says yes, they ask to leave. The remaining participants are shown photographs while their pulse rate is measured. The independent variable is whether the participants are of whether the photographs are of animals with 8 legs or animals with 4 legs. Now, read it again. Bella is conducting a laboratory experiment to find out about people's fear of animals. She asks each participant if they have any phobias. If the participant says yes, they ask to leave. The remaining participants are shown photographs while their pulse rate is being measured. The independent variable is whether the participants are of animals with 8 legs. Sorry, the independent variable is whether the photographs are of animals with 8 legs or animals with 4 legs. Moving on to the question, this says, the experiment used a repeated measures design. Explain one advantage of this design in this study. So you get the first mark for putting down the advantage, the second mark for linking it. Now, a repeated measures design, remember, a repeated measures design is when the same participants are made to go through different experimental conditions. Now, the repeated measures design, where did it go? So this or an advantage of repeated measures design over here would be it reduces individual differences or participant variables, as I had referred to it earlier. How do you get the second mark here? In an independent measures design, all the people who don't like 8 likes might be one group. The same group is tested or both species. So if some people dislike on all animals, it doesn't matter. Now, moving on to another question real quick. This question over here reads, Ella is conducting a laboratory experiment to find out whether singing helps people to relax. She's using a repeated measures design and will use pulse rate to measure relaxation. Identify a suitable control. Okay, no, that's not relevant to experimental designs. We would pick this information from here and jump on to the question 9b. Explain why repeated measures design is the best experimental design for Ella's study. Now, people in an independent measures design might vary, individual differences. People are different, the same thing. It avoids the effects of individual differences, the same thing. To be able to score 2 marks, they might differ in the normal pulse rate. This would be an uncontrolled variable. This would help you, I mean, writing all the, catering to all the 3 criteria would help you score a 3 on 3. This I've tried explaining earlier when in the videos that I have made, especially for novel research situations. Now these are the questions that we have had on on experimental designs earlier. So this is another situation. Carol is interested in theory of mind. She's comparing adults in caring jobs such as nursing with adults in non-caring jobs that have less contact with the public. Carroll believes that adults in caring jobs will score higher on the ICE test than those in non-caring jobs. Moving on to the question on experimental designs, the question over here reads, explain the experimental design being used in Carroll's study. 1 mark for identifying it. This is an independent measures design. Remember, my dear, keep the definition in mind. The definition was an independent measures design is when an independent, I'll just open this so that you might as well understand this better. So an independent measures design is when different participants are made to go through different experimental conditions. Now, we also have had a 6 mark question on this. Describe one similarity and one difference between an independent measures design and a repeated measures design using an example. You might as well pick up similarities and differences from here. I hope this has helped. Thank you.